Hey everyone, wow, I'm really high up here. My name is Carrie Baker, and I'm a professor at Smith College in the program for the study of women and gender, and I'm also a regular writer for Ms. Magazine, covering, among other things, reproductive rights. And when I was asked to give this sermon, I was a little not sure. I actually have given one sermon in my life. It was when I was 18 years old. I gave the senior sermon in my Methodist church in Westport, Connecticut. So it's been 40 years, so I'm a little rusty, but I'm thrilled to be here. And the opportunity to give this sermon, so I do a lot of public speaking and teaching and writing, but this sermon gave me an opportunity to think maybe in a way I don't normally think about reproductive rights, which is to think about the deeper sort of underlying reasons and, to use King's phrase, morality of activism around reproductive rights. So that's what I want to kind of dig into today. And thank you so much, Anne, for doing that reading. That was a reading from the letter from the Birmingham jail written by Martin Luther King in August of 1963. And I'll say a little bit more about it. Was in response to 8 white ministers who condemned him for civil disobedience that involved breaking the law, breaking segregation laws. Okay, so pleasure to be here today. Thank you. On January 22nd, 1973, 51 years ago tomorrow, the U.S. Supreme Court decided Roe versus Wade, which recognized the constitutional right to liberty included the right to make reproductive decisions without government interference. On June 22nd, 2022, a year and a half ago, the current Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, opening the door to state bans across the country. Today, a year and a half later, 14 states fully ban abortion at fertilization, which, by the way, is before someone is pregnant. And in addition, 2 states ban abortion at 6 weeks, another 2 at 12 weeks, another 3 between 15 and 18 weeks, and courts have blocked bans in another 3 states. So 21 states have bans, which are in effect in 18 states. Over the last several years, in response to abortion bans and restrictions, advocates around the country have developed an alternative supply network for abortion pills outside of the law. In my writing for Ms. Magazine, I've covered this movement closely and interviewed many people involved, and I've even myself participated in this movement to a certain degree. And by the way, I didn't mention, but I'm also a lawyer. So as a lawyer and a generally law-abiding citizen, my participation in this extra-legal work is not done lightly. Today, I want to offer a moral justification for my decision to do this, relying on Martin Luther King. So the reading for today, as I said, is King's letter from the Birmingham jail written in August 1963. He was imprisoned there for participating in nonviolent demonstrations against segregation. The letter, written in longhand, was his response to a public statement issued by 8 white Southern religious leaders expressing concern and caution about King's willingness to engage in civil disobedience by breaking the law. The letter was King's explanation of why he felt compelled to do so. In the letter, as you heard, King distinguishes between just and unjust laws, citing St. Augustine. And again, King was very embedded, obviously, in the Christian religious tradition. Citing St. Augustine, he explained, an unjust law is no law at all. In answering the question of how to distinguish between just and unjust laws, King appeals to, and I quote, moral law and eternal and natural law, citing St. Thomas Aquinas. He argues that just laws uplift the human personality and unjust laws degrade the human personality. He argued that an unjust law, and I quote, distorts the soul and damages the personality. And as quoting Martin Buber, he argues that an unjust law substitutes the I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. So what does it mean to uplift the human personality? What does it mean to distort the soul and treat people like things? Well, King was, of course, talking about Jim Crow laws that segregated people based on race. He was explaining how he could, on the one hand, insist that Southern states follow the law established by the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Education, while at the same time himself defying Southern states' segregation laws. He argued that the violence of racial segregation distorted the soul, degraded the human personality, and treated Black people like things. Segregation laws were therefore morally wrong and sinful, argued King, and therefore he was justified and in fact compelled to violate them. Today, I'll use King's arguments to analyze current-day abortion bans and argue that these laws are also morally wrong and sinful for similar reasons. Now, many might find this argument surprising or unnecessary or even potentially offensive. People on the left, including many feminists, have ceded the religious language of morality and sin to religious conservatives. I believe this is a mistake. We need to translate our ideas into all languages to succeed in the movement for human rights. So that's what I'm going to try to do today. And by the way, I also just want to say that a lot of anti-abortion people break the law. They kill doctors, they storm clinics, they blockade clinics. And I want to think about what's the difference between what they're doing and what people who are defying abortion bans are now doing. How are we justified and they are not justified? So that's sort of a large, and also just more generally in a context of January 6th and the breaking of law and the erosion of the rule of law and of democracy. So I think it's really important that we do have a rule of law and that we do respect the law, but that we are able to resist unjust laws and tyrannical laws at the same time. But how do we justify that? That's what I want to speak to today. So I ask you, do abortion bans uplift or degrade human personality? Do they distort the soul and damage the human personality? Do they give people supporting them a false sense of superiority and make people seeking abortion care feel a sense of inferiority? Do they substitute the I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship and relegate persons to the status of things? I would answer an emphatic yes to all of these questions. Let me explain. Headlines over the last year and a half, since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, gives us ample evidence of how abortion bans harm the dignity, rights, and health of women and people who can become pregnant. Shortly after Dobbs, in June of 2022, a 10-year-old pregnant rape victim had to flee the state of Ohio, where abortion had been banned, to obtain an abortion in Indiana. At the end of last year, a 31-year-old Dallas mother, mother of two, named Kate Cox, received a lethal fetal diagnosis. Her doctor told her that she needed an abortion in order to preserve her health and her fertility. but that the Texas abortion ban only allowed abortion if death was imminent, which it wasn't in her case. Cox filed a lawsuit asking a Texas Supreme Court for clarification on whether she qualified under the law. A trial court granted her request, but then Attorney General Ken Paxton appealed the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Cox eventually fled the state of Texas to obtain an abortion. The Texas Supreme Court later ruled that she did not qualify to receive an abortion under the law of Texas. Another 22 women who had life-threatening pregnancies have sued the state of Texas for clarification on what the law allows, how close to death they have to be to get an abortion, because the state has refused to clearly define the parameters of the exceptions to the law, making doctors fear offering abortions at all. Just last month, a 33-year-old Ohio woman, Brittany Watts, sought treatment at a hospital as she was suffering a miscarriage. While in excruciating pain, Watts waited 8 hours while a hospital ethics committee considered her case. They denied her care and sent her home instead of treating her. She later delivered a non-viable fetus at home, alone, in her bathroom. She then returned to the hospital where she was treated with suspicion rather than compassion. The hospital reported her to the police, and Ohio prosecutors charged her with abuse of a corpse because she miscarried into a toilet. A grand jury later dismissed the charge. Prosecutors are increasingly bringing criminal charges against pregnant women and people who struggle with drug addiction or who engage in behaviors that otherwise would not be a crime, such as failing to go to the doctor, refusing to follow a doctor's orders, or driving without a seatbelt. There was such a case. In a recent report titled "The Rise of Pregnancy Criminalization" by the organization Pregnancy Justice, they document how government officials are investigating, arresting, and prosecuting pregnant women and people at an accelerating pace in recent years, often under the pretext of protecting unborn life. Whereas a 2013 study found 413 cases of pregnancy-related criminalization across the United States between 1973 and 2005, the recent study found 1,396 cases of criminalization of pregnant people between 2006 and 2022, over 3 times as many cases in half as many years. And this study runs through Dobbs. So what's happened since Dobbs? The vast majority of cases involve charges of criminal child neglect, abuse, or endangerment, and many relied on the cooperation of healthcare providers and family regulation systems, known as child welfare agencies. Finally, these laws will lead to women's and people's death. The first woman to die because she was not offered a life-saving abortion due to an abortion ban was Jennifer Alvarez Estrada Glick. She died in July of 2022 in Luling, Texas. If you want to know more about her story, The New Yorker has an extended piece on this. And I'm sure there's more who have died. And it's usually women and people carrying pregnancies to term who have complications, not women seeking abortions, in part because of this underground abortion pill movement I'm about to tell you about. So abortion bans have led to denial of medically necessary health care, putting people's lives in danger, and they have led to threats of criminal prosecution. These laws enable healthcare providers, police, and the public to bully and control women and pregnant people. These actions degrade and damage the human personality and distort the soul, to use King's words. I would argue these laws give some people a false sense of superiority and make people seeking abortion experience a false sense of inferiority. In the movement, we should call that abortion stigma. I would argue these laws substitute an I-it relationship for the I-thou relationship and relegate persons to the status of things, whose lives are not valued, whose dignity is not respected, and whose rights are disregarded. King was committed to the equal worth of each individual, which he defined as treating human beings as ends in themselves and never instrumentalizing them as a means or objectifying them as things. Abortion bans treat pregnant people as a means to the end of producing babies. And they objectify women as things, as incubators. King was committed to treat each person as a free agent, someone with the capacity and right to, as he said, deliberate, decide, and respond. To do otherwise is to objectify and debase what it means to be fully human. Laws banning abortion objectify women and pregnant people, denying them the right to make moral decisions for themselves. Therefore, these laws are unjust, immoral, and sinful, to use King's words. King described racial discrimination as a particular form of evil or sin. I argue that sexual domination in the form of abortion bans is also a form of evil or sin. Abortion bans make women and pregnant people second-class citizens, denying them the right to be free agents, moral decision makers, and democratic subjects. King condemns sinful racial hierarchies. Abortion bans are part of sinful sexual hierarchies. Finally, in the passage we read today, King argued that an unjust law is, and I quote, a code inflicted upon a minority which that minority had no part in enacting or creating because it did not have the unhampered right to vote. Well, women are not a minority, and a lot of women have unhampered rights to vote, although I'd argue that many don't, particularly women of color. At the time when King wrote this, the Southern legislatures that adopted laws segregating Black and white people were clearly not democratically elected. Black Americans did not have the unhampered right to vote. They were not equally or even proportionally represented in the legislative bodies of the Southern states where racial segregation was enacted into law. However, I would argue that today we are also do not have democratically elected legislatures in states where abortion bans are being adopted. Let me explain. How is it that over 60% of Americans support abortion rights, but Roe was overturned and 16 states now ban abortion in most circumstances? How is that? Is that democratic? When the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia died in February of 2016, over 6 or close to 10 months before the next presidential election, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell refused to hold a vote on President Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland for a seat on the Supreme Court, saying that it was too close to the election. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg died in October of 2020, McConnell rushed through an appointment of Amy Coney Barrett just weeks before the 2020 election. A president whose vote count fell millions of votes short of his opponent appointed 3 Supreme Court justices who joined the extreme right wing of the court to overturn a half-century-old constitutional right supported by a large majority of Americans. Then politicians in states with high levels of gerrymandering and voter suppression banned abortion, contrary to the wishes of the majority of voters in those states. Let me explain this. In states banning abortion, women's political representation is remarkably low. Men make up over 80% or more of state legislatures in these states that have banned abortion at fertilization: West Virginia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, and Oklahoma. And these bans do not have exceptions for rape or incest. In South Carolina, which has a 6-week ban, women are also less than 20% of the legislature. In West Virginia, women are only 12.7% of the state legislature. And those 88% of men banned abortion. In all states banning abortion, men make up over 2/3 of legislators. The U.S. lags behind 68 other countries worldwide in women's political representation in national legislatures, with American women holding only 29% of seats in Congress. At the state level, women overall hold only 32.6% of state legislative seats. In the courts, women make up only 1/3 of federal judges and state court judges. Women's lack of representation in legislatures and courts making decisions about our bodies makes abortion bans unjust, makes Dobbs, the decision overturning Roe, unjust, and I would argue compels me to violate these laws. For the reasons stated above and more, I believe that abortion bans are unjust. King distinguished between just and unjust laws in order to explain why he was morally obligated to break laws requiring segregation. I believe that the fact that abortion bans are unjust provides a moral justification for breaking laws banning abortion. Today, there is a robust alternative delivery system providing abortion pills to people in all 50 states, including states banning or restricting abortion. This system, which operates outside of the medical system, provides abortion pills, which, by the way, are safer than Tylenol. And the only reason they're so highly restricted at this point is because of anti-abortion politics. So this system provides abortion pills in two ways primarily. One, vetted online vendors who sell generic abortion pills for as little as $42 with 3-day shipping. And two, activist networks that mail free generic abortion pills to people in restricted states who can't afford other options. People in all 50 states can also get advanced provision abortion pills online for $25 with 3-week delivery. Several organizations and resources exist to support people seeking and using abortion pills. For information on providers who mail pills to all states, there is an organization called Plan C, which has an amazing website, which is constantly updated. It's plancpills.org. For medical support, there's an organization called the Miscarriage and Abortion Hotline, which provides confidential and free medical expert care to people who are self-managing abortion with pills they order online or receive in other ways. For peer support, there is reprocare.com. For free confidential legal services, there's Repro Legal Helpline. This robust alternative delivery system has served tens of thousands of people in the United States in the last year and a half, and it's growing all the time. I am morally compelled to support this work as a form of civil disobedience in defiance of unjust laws imposed by undemocratically elected politicians and judges and unrepresentative legislatures that degrade and endanger women and pregnant people. I also support the work of advocates who have pushed the boundaries of the law with telemedicine abortion provider shield laws passed in 6 states, including Massachusetts, so that US-based healthcare providers can offer FDA-approved abortion pills to people in all 50 states, including those with bans. And by the way, those organizations are serving over 6,000 people a month. So if you live in Texas, you can do telemedicine with a doctor here in Massachusetts and have them send you overnight abortion pills which you get within a couple days, and then you can consult with that doctor afterwards. This is saving people's lives. This is saving people's lives. I do these things because I believe that we cannot become habituated to the injustice of abortion bans. Martin Luther King described civil disobedience as a rejection of the habituated acquiescence to the injustice of segregation. Civil disobedience creatively enacted new habits and new relations required for a functioning multi-racial democracy. According to King, nonviolent direct action enabled a recovery of agency by the oppressed. It buried the, as he said, psychology of servitude. King said, and quote, "We can make ourselves free, not only by fighting for freedom and dignity, but by enacting that freedom and dignity. Fighting for better laws and challenging bad laws in the courts are critical parts of the fight for freedom and dignity of women and pregnant people. But so is the underground abortion pill movement, which enacts that freedom and dignity directly and resists the psychology of servitude and the habitual acquiescence to unjust anti-abortion laws." I hope you'll join me in enacting that freedom and dignity by sharing information about these alternative abortion pill delivery systems in the United States and maybe supporting them as well. All you need to remember is www.plancpills.org. Thank you very much.